Americans love cruising for a very simple reason. It makes you feel safe without having to think. Everything is already taken care of. Rooms are clean, food is always available, staff are always smiling, and the ocean, well, it's out there separated from you by a very thick pane of glass. If you've ever looked at a cruise brochure, you'll see nothing but beautiful people, blue skies, and smiles that never seem to tire. And to be fair, that part is true, at least half of it. The other half isn't in the ads. Not because it's terrifying, but because it's a little inconvenient to mention. These stories aren't meant to scare you away from the sea. They're just here to give you a few details the brochure usually forgets to include. Story 1: The Wave That Didn't Book a Room. The room was genuinely beautiful. The bed was soft enough to make you believe that every problem in life could be solved with a good night's sleep. Thick curtains, soft lighting, and a giant glass window so that you could lie in bed and still feel connected to nature. A kind of luxury that makes you proud for upgrading. The sea that night was calm. At least it was calm when you decided to close your eyes. No announcements, no alarm, no polite voice saying just a little heads up. There was only one slightly odd detail. The night fell faster than usual, but everyone assumed it was just because they were sleepy. Then the wave came. It didn't knock. It didn't ask permission. It slammed straight into the glass as if the room had always belonged to it. The seawater poured onto the bed, cold, salty, and decisive. No one books a cruise expecting to wake up like that, but the sea doesn't read brochures. Story 2: Power Out in Paradise. This cruise was very modern. Everything ran on electricity. Elevators, hallway lights, automatic doors, coffee machines, and even your sense of security. People believe that on a ship like this, losing power only happens in old movies. Then there was a quick flash, so quick that many thought they had just blinked too hard. After that, the ship sank into darkness. Not the romantic kind for stargazing, the kind that makes you realize you have no idea where the stairs are and the elevators have collectively decided to quit. No music, no machinery hum, no reassuring announcements, just a sudden silence heavy enough that everyone could hear their own thoughts. In that darkness, everyone froze. Not out of calm, but because no one was sure what to do next. It turns out technology is very smart, just it's smartest when it's still working. Story 3: The Sailor Who Was No Longer Joking. This sailor had been at sea long enough to tell storm jokes while pouring coffee. He stood on deck sharing old stories about massive waves, strong winds, and how the ocean always liked to scare people for fun. Everyone laughed. Experience counts. When someone has survived countless voyages, you naturally assume they know what's happening. The wind began to shift, slightly. The waves grew taller, but not enough to spill a drink on the table. No one worried, experience was still there. Then the sailor went silent. He said nothing more, no explanations, no reassurance, just stared at the sea longer than usual. The detail that stuck with many was when he removed his hat and bowed his head as if acknowledging something to the ocean. It turns out experience is very trustworthy, it's just not always under warranty. Story 4: The Storm That Didn't Exist on the App. On the cruise, everyone had their favorite weather app. Some trusted Apple Weather. Others swore by an app with more colors than a rainbow. People shared forecasts like they were showing off a license. Sunny skies, calm seas, light breeze. Very reassuring. And indeed, the sky remained blue. White clouds, gentle sun, no signs of trouble. If anything felt off, it was just a slight heaviness in the air, like it was holding a secret. The pressure changed, but no one on deck checked it. Everyone checked their phones. Then the storm hit. No warning, no time to prepare. Suddenly, the wind picked up, the waves changed color, and the ship started reacting in ways not mentioned in any brochure. The most memorable detail wasn't the wind or the waves. It was the moment everyone looked at their phones and realized no signal. The weather app stayed open. It was just that the ocean refused to update its data. Story 5: The Bed That Was No Longer Under You. That night began very peacefully. The kind of peace that makes you believe you'll sleep straight through until morning and wake up feeling like your money was well spent. Soft bed, warm blankets, the ship moving so gently it almost didn't exist. Then the ship tilted. Not much, just enough to wake you and make you think you'd shifted in bed. But then the furniture started sliding. A glass rolled slowly across the table. Chairs shifted, seemingly looking for a new position. Everyone woke up. No one screamed. Only those holding onto the walls wore intensely focused expressions like it was an unexpected balance exercise. The detail people remembered most wasn't the ship. It was the bed. It slid aside, leaving its familiar spot, giving the feeling that something fundamental had just changed. It seemed that night it wasn't just the ship tilting. Gravity had decided to take a vacation too. Story 6, The Last Dinner. Dinner on a cruise is always impressive. Long buffets, bright lights, perfectly arranged food that makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen in such a beautifully decorated place. The familiar smells of food fill the room, giving a highly professional sense of comfort. Then another smell appeared, very faint. So faint that everyone assumed it was just something slightly overcooked. No one got up, no one complained, the buffet carried on as usual. A few minutes later, the burnt smell was no longer subtle. The kitchen was on fire and it spread fast the way safely designed things usually do. Alarms rang, staff ran, smoke began creeping down the hallways. The detail most remembered wasn't the flames, it was the smoke. Thick, slow, and persistent, as if it knew exactly where it was going. It seems even paradise floating on the sea needs more than pretty lights. It needs fire extinguishers. Story 7, The Restroom That Betrayed. This cruise was very clean. So clean that you believed everything was controlled by procedures and checklists. Every system was self-contained, running quietly designed, so you never had to think about how it worked. Then there was a strange sound, not loud, not alarming, a very brief noise like someone had just slammed a door a little too hard. No one paid it any mind. On a cruise, important things usually don't make a sound. A few minutes later, the system began reacting in a chain reaction. No fire, no explosions, no drama, just everything slowly moving out of its usual place. The detail people remembered for a long time wasn't the malfunction itself. It was the smell. It spread slowly, confidently through hallways, elevators, and decks, like an announcement no one wanted to receive. Cruises are designed to share many things. Unfortunately, some things should never be shared at all. Story 8, Drill versus Reality. Safety drills on a cruise are usually pretty fun. Everyone gathers, listens to instructions, tries on life jackets, then laughs because everyone looks a little silly. The atmosphere is light, more like a group activity to pass the time than preparation for anything serious. Everyone assumes that if something real happens, it will be just like that. There will be time, order, an instructor standing there pointing the way. Then the real alarm goes off. This sound is different. No one laughs, no one is sure whether to stay put or move. People start walking faster, talking louder, and looking at each other more. The chaos doesn't come from shouting, but from confusion. Everyone tries to remember where they stood during the drill. The detail that made many shiver is when they realize there isn't enough space like they imagined. It turns out drills are useful, it's just that they're never anything like reality. Story 9, The Door That Wouldn't Open. The emergency exits on a cruise are advertised very clearly. Bright signs, arrows pointing the way, and the feeling that if anything happens, just follow the design and you'll be fine. Everything looks logical, especially when you don't actually need it. The heat started rising. Not suddenly, just enough to make the air uncomfortable and your shirt stick to your back faster than usual. People moved according to the arrows, following the procedure, trusting the plan. Then the door wouldn't open. Not locked, no noise, just standing there calmly as if contemplating something. Some tried again, some knocked harder. The detail that made it memorable was the sound. The knocks started clear, then faded, grew sparse, as if the room itself was swallowing them. Design is often praised for being smart. Too bad it can't feel regret. Story 10, The Person Who Disappeared. A nighttime walk on deck is one of the quietest pleasures on a cruise. Cool breeze, dark sea warm, yellow lights, just enough to make you believe everything is still under control. Some walk alone, some stop to watch the waves, a moment that feels very cinematic. The cameras were working fine, everything was being recorded. At least in theory. That person went out on deck, but never returned. No one noticed immediately. On a cruise, someone disappearing for a few hours isn't unusual. There are too many bars to explain that away. When the search began, it was thorough. Crew passengers' lights scanning the water, but the surface of the sea remained the same. Dark, flat, unresponsive. The detail that stuck with many wasn't the cameras, it was the color of the water. The sea doesn't take things noisily, and it doesn't usually give them back. Story 11, The Strange Sickness at Sea. Parties on a cruise are always crowded. People stand closer than usual, talk louder than usual, and laugh more than necessary. In such a space, fatigue is usually shrugged off as too much fun last night. At first, only one person seemed tired, not serious, a little rest and they'd be fine. On a cruise, everything has a simple explanation. Then a few more people got sick. Not all at once, not in the same place, but enough that the crew started speaking in hushed tones. Some areas were temporarily closed. No one panicked, the schedule just shifted slightly. Quarantine happened fairly smoothly, hallways were sealed, doors didn't open, no big warning signs, just silent gaps where people had once walked. The detail that chilled many wasn't the sickness itself. It was the sudden absence of sound. Cruises are designed to connect people very well, sometimes a little too well. Story 12, The Footsteps. Night shifts on a cruise are usually very quiet. So quiet that people start noticing things normally ignored during the day. Crew patrolling hallway lights steady everything in its place. Then there was a sound. Not loud, not sudden, just light rhythmic footsteps behind them. The night crew stopped, the footsteps stopped too. They turned around, no one there. At first, everyone assumed they were tired. Night shift, the brain fills in the blanks to pass the time, but then the footsteps returned. Same rhythm, same spacing, no faster, no slower. The tension didn't come from fear, but from repetition. There was nothing to react to, no one to ask. The detail that unsettled people the most was when the hallway was empty, yet the footsteps continued as if someone or something was extremely patient. Maybe not every fear needs a shape. Some just need sound. Story 13, The Empty Ship. The ship was found drifting quite peacefully. No smoke, no distress signals. It just floated there as if taking a break in the middle of the sea with no signs of trouble at all. When people approached, everything still looked normal. Food left on tables, glasses not empty, lights still on in a few cabins. Only one slightly inconvenient detail: no one was there. Not the kind of absence caused by someone hiding somewhere, a total absence. No voices, no footsteps, no signs anyone had just left. The investigation was serious. Logs were opened, hypotheses suggested, then ruled out one by one. No explanation was convincing enough to linger. The detail most remembered was the dining table, still untouched, as if the meal had simply paused midway. Some questions don't need an answer. They exist perfectly fine on their own. Story 14. The Journal That Stopped Suddenly. The journal started out very normal. Notes about the weather, the route, a few familiar comments about the sea and the ship. Neat, even handwriting, typical of someone who likes things clear and orderly. Then the writing began to change. Not much, just slightly slanted strokes, heavier lines closer together. No explanation, just the feeling that the writer was in more of a hurry than before. The last page contained only one sentence. Not long, no crossouts, no sign that the writer intended to continue. One sentence stood there completely independent, as if it needed no additional context. The detail that unsettled people wasn't the content, but the way it ended. No more, no less, no next page to turn. No one could find a satisfactory explanation. Perhaps sometimes to end a story, you don't need a disaster. Sometimes you just run out of paper. Story 15. The Compass That Couldn't Decide. That day's voyage was perfectly stable. Clear skies, calm seas, the ship moving on schedule at the right speed. Everything looked so precise that no one felt the need to double-check anything. It was the kind of day that makes you believe you're heading in the right direction, literally and figuratively. Then the compass started acting up. The needle didn't stay still. It swiveled slightly, then a little more, as if undecided between several options. No one panicked. A device acting up occasionally is a very technical problem. But the needle didn't stop. It spun steadily, persistently, slowly enough to make people uneasy. The ship began to slow down. Not due to danger, but because no one was sure which direction to follow. The detail that chilled people wasn't getting lost. It was the feeling of no longer knowing what was right and what was wrong. It seems even guidance has its limits. And when it stops working, every direction starts to look the same. Story 16, Colliding with Nothing. The sea that day was convincingly empty. No other ships, no obstacles, nothing on the map worth noticing. The ship moved steadily, confident that there was nothing ahead to crash into. Then the collision happened. No warning, no drama, just a strong jolt enough to tip a glass on the table and make everyone simultaneously look up at the ceiling as if the answer was there. The hull was torn. Not badly, not enough to cause immediate panic, but enough to be undeniable. The strangest part, no one could find what the ship had hit. The sea was empty. The radar showed nothing. Everything around looked innocent. The detail people couldn't forget was the crack. There it was, real clear, even though its cause was completely absent. It seems not everything needs to exist to leave an impact. Some things just need to leave a trace. Story 17, The Lifeboat. The evacuation started fairly orderly, at least for the first few minutes. Everyone put on life jackets, lined up, followed instructions, just like in the safety videos. No one wanted to be the first to break the illusion that everything was under control. Then the waves grew bigger. Not the kind in the brochure, but the kind that makes a small boat suddenly feel very small. The lifeboat was lowered into the water, rocked gently, then more violently. Someone laughed nervously as if this were just the fun part of the trip. Then the boat capsized. Not dramatic, not slow, just a very definite moment of imbalance. People fell into the water cold and startled in ways the life jacket hadn't prepared them for. The detail people couldn't forget was a hand gripping the life jacket. Not waving, not shouting, just holding on. It was called a lifeboat. Turns out a name isn't always a promise. Story 18, A Small Mistake. On a cruise, everything runs by procedure, checklists for every step, instructions for every action, and the belief that if you follow the order, risks vanish automatically. The system is so tight that people feel like tiny parts of a vast, intelligent machine. Then a single action went wrong, not a big mistake, not hitting a red button by accident, just one step done slightly too fast or slightly too slow. Very human. The system responded immediately. No explosions, no fire, just everything stopping one by one like a very polite chain of dominoes. Screens went dark, lights dimmed. Some things stopped responding entirely. The remarkable part, no one claimed responsibility. Not to hide, but because no one was sure where the fault lay. Everyone stood there staring at the silent system, waiting for it to speak. The detail that haunted people the most was that silence. No warning, no explanation. It turns out a mistake doesn't have to be big. It just has to be in the right place. Story 19, The Sealed Files. After the incident, the internal investigation began very seriously. Meetings, reports, people taking notes so meticulously that you'd believe everything would eventually be clarified. Cruises don't like leaving questions unanswered, at least on paper. Documents were collected, minutes were recorded, some files were temporarily sealed, not to hide anything, but to wait for a more appropriate moment. That moment, for some reason, always seemed to be in the future. No official announcements, no lengthy press releases. Everything gradually faded away, just as stories best left untold usually do. Passengers disembarked, crew changed shifts, time handled the rest. The detail most remembered wasn't what was written down. It was what was missing from the files. A few blank pages, no misprints, no lost data, just emptiness. Maybe not every truth disappears. Some just get tucked away in a drawer. And drawers are usually very deep. Story 20, Returning to Land. The survivors returned to land mostly intact. They walked normally, spoke normally, and tried to slip back into the familiar rhythm of life as if the sea trip had been just a slightly longer vacation. There were no obvious signs that anything had happened. Life went on. Work traffic, supermarkets, things solid and still. Everyone assumed the hardest part had stayed out there with the ship and the ocean. Then they heard the sound of waves, not from the sea, from a video, an ad, or just some sound that happened to play somewhere. Their bodies reacted before their minds could catch up. Hearts raced, breathing quickened, some covered their ears as if the sound could make everything flood back. The haunting detail wasn't the memory, it was the reflex. It came naturally. Perhaps the sea didn't follow them home, but clearly it didn't stay in the sea either. Story 21, Sleep No Longer Safe. During the day, everything seemed fine. People worked, chatted, made coffee, and nodded when asked, "Is everything okay?" And it did look fine, at least by daytime standards. Night was different. When the lights went out, when voices faded, the brain reopened files it had deliberately ignored during the day. Sleep came slower, and when it came, so did the water. In dreams, water flooded the room, not rushed, not violent, just fast enough for you to realize you were no longer in control. People woke up in the middle of the night, hearts pounding, sheets soaked with cold sweat, and it took several seconds to convince themselves the bed was still dry. The haunting detail wasn't in the dream itself, but in the feeling afterward. Awake, but the body still didn't believe it. Memory can forget quickly, the body doesn't, it remembers far longer. Story 22, the safety rules. After the disaster, everything became very serious. Meetings, many meetings. People sat around the table nodding at the right moments, choosing words precisely to describe what shouldn't have happened. The atmosphere was full of responsibility, like a proper debriefing session. Then, new documents appeared. Thicker, more detailed, with clauses no one had thought necessary before. Every line was carefully considered, as if writing clearly could somehow make the past less troublesome. The documents were signed, the date was beautiful, neat, formal, all done after enough time had passed that no one was wet or losing sleep over it. The rules were enforced, procedures updated, everything looked safer. The most haunting detail wasn't the content of the law, but the date printed at the bottom. Time is very polite, it always moves forward, it just never comes back to fix things for anyone. Story 23, the sea hates no one. The ocean that day was very calm. So calm that people believed nothing worrisome could possibly happen in a place that looked so gentle. The water was flat, the wind light, everything perfect for an ideal day at sea. Then the accident happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just a brief moment when everything shifted from its familiar place. Someone got hurt. Something was lost. Something could not be recovered. The remarkable thing, the ocean didn't react. No waves, no change in color, nothing at all except continuing to exist exactly as it always had. No anger, no pity, no concern. Afterward, everything remained calm. The sea was so flat that if you didn't know what had happened, you would never guess it had just witnessed something. The most haunting detail was that calmness. The sea hates no one, but perhaps its indifference is far more dangerous than any fury. Story 24, first-class ticket. The suites on the cruise were truly worth the money. Bigger, quieter, better beds with enough details to make you feel like you'd purchased an invisible layer of safety. At least that's how it felt. When the incident occurred, at first, everything seemed orderly. Staff giving instructions, passengers moving, no one mentioned ticket class, no one needed to. Incidents don't check booking info. Everyone faced the same situation, same hallway, same rhythm of waiting, no private path, no priority, no exceptions for those who paid extra to avoid this feeling. The detail people remembered most wasn't the incident itself, but the line of people pressed together. No distinction between large or small rooms, just faces, all very similar, sharing the same moment of waiting. Tickets can buy extra space, extra amenities, extra comfort, but it turns out they can't buy luck. Story 25, control. People board a cruise with a very modern confidence. Big ship, advanced machinery, backup systems, for everything you could imagine. Every problem has a button. And if something goes wrong, there's surely a screen explaining what's happening. For a while, that was exactly how it felt. The ship ran smoothly, the sea-obedient technology doing its job. No one doubted they were in control. Then nature changed its mind. No warning, no reason. Stronger winds, unpredictable waves, and things that used to fit neatly on a chart started behaving differently. Systems responded, humans reacted, but only up to a point. In the end, many people just stood and watched, not because they didn't want to act, but because there was nothing left to do. Technology could only record. The most haunting detail was that moment. Everything was working, yet no one was truly in control. It turns out control is a very convincing feeling. Too bad no one asked nature's opinion on the matter. Story 26, the only lesson. The journey began like any other. People boarded with familiar expectations, rest watch the sea, come home with a few nice photos and a funny story to tell. No one thought this trip would carry a lesson. Then the incident happened. Not loudly, no need to list details, just enough to make everything different from when it began. There were losses, things that could never be put back exactly as they were. After that came silence. Not because there was nothing to say, but because anything said felt superfluous. The ship kept moving, the sea remained, but among those who shared the journey, a very clear void appeared. The most haunting detail was that void. No one pointed to it. No one named it, yet everyone knew it existed. If this trip left a lesson, it was a short one. Some experiences don't need words to understand, they only need to happen once. Story 27, advertising. Cruise ads are always gorgeous, the sky perfectly blue, the sea smooth as if ironed, and everyone smiling. Relaxed smiles, no sweat, no worries, no one clutching a life jacket too seriously. Looking at it, you'd believe it's a smart decision. The ads don't lie, they just choose to show the easy parts. No one mentions risk because risk doesn't look good on camera. No one stands in front of the lens to talk about the moments when the lighting isn't flattering and no one knows where to stand. Viewers believe it pretty easily because everyone wants to believe their vacation will look like that. The detail that unsettles people isn't what appears in the ad, but what's at the bottom of the page. The fine print, really tiny. So tiny you have to lean in close just to read it if you even want to. It seems fear isn't forbidden. It's just never printed large enough. Story 28, still taking cruises. People forget faster than they think, especially the things that make them uncomfortable. After a while, memories are neatly stored, edges smoothed out, and everything starts to seem more pleasant. Then they book tickets again. Not because they've forgotten everything, but because they remember in a less frightening way. This time they're a bit more careful. Read a few more reviews, choose a different room. Believe that just changing a few small details will make a difference. And then they believe again. Believe that bad things are rare. Believe that they won't be in that group. Believe that the odds this time are in their favor. The cycle repeats neatly. Go, believe, return, rest a bit, then go again. The haunting detail isn't in each trip, but in that loop. Repeated steadily, no reminders needed. Human memory has limits, and apparently that's why so many things keep happening. Story 29, the untold parts. When an incident occurs, the media jumps in quickly. Reports appear on Time Voices, calm words carefully chosen. Everyone is informed that something happened, but the situation is under control. It sounds reassuring. What is told is true. Just a part, the easy-to-tell part, the part that doesn't make anyone ask more questions once the TV is off. The rest remains silent, not because it doesn't exist, but because it isn't necessary to mention. Time passes and does its job well. New reports appear, old stories get pushed down. No one actively searches for the details that were left out. The most haunting detail isn't in the broadcast, but between the lines. A space that is very clean, very polite, and very hard to grasp. You know just enough to feel reassured, and usually that's enough to stop you from asking further questions. Story 30, the emergency exit. The emergency exit signs on the cruise are always very clear. Bright arrows, large letters placed at eye level, making you believe that in an emergency, you just need to follow them. Everything looks orderly. When it's time to run, people run. No hesitation, no laughter. Just hurried steps following the arrows already in place. The exit is there, the sign is lit. Nothing is wrong. It's just too late. Too late because of the distance. Too late because of the crowd. Too late because of things that don't appear on the map. The arrow still points straight ahead, steadfast as if completely unaware that everything ahead has changed. The most haunting detail isn't the door, but the arrow. It's still there, bright and calm, doing its job. Having an exit doesn't mean you can actually use it. Story 31, the final question. The sea is still beautiful, very beautiful, blue, vast, and calm enough to make you forget what you just heard. The cruise is still luxurious, the lights still shine. The scene looks exactly as the brochure promised. The stories end here. No plot twist, no explosive final scene. Just a series of small pieces placed neatly on the table, not overlapping. Listeners usually fall silent at this point, not out of fear, but because the mind is at work. It begins comparing, recalling, imagining. Maybe a trip that once was, or a trip being planned. The most haunting detail isn't the sea or the ship. It's the thought that just appeared in your head. Very small, very personal, yet hard to dismiss. No one here is telling you not to take a cruise. No one is advising you to stay away from the sea. The sea is still beautiful, and the cruise most of the time is still very safe. These stories aren't meant to scare you nor to act smarter than you. They simply exist, like the half of the experience that the brochure doesn't mention, not because it's bad, but because it's slightly inconvenient. If after hearing all this, you still book a ticket, that's fine. Many people do. There's only one thing that might change. Next time when you look at a brochure, perhaps you'll take a slightly slower look.